Chapter 4, Continuity 101, the BIA. The BIA, otherwise known as the Business Impact Assessment, it doesn't have to be about a business. It could just be an organization, family, whatever. But the BIA, it's a jargon term for this, has 5 stages. It is very important that you do each of these 5 stages individually. You do not have them influence each other. What you're going to do, ideally, is basically create these 5 components in no particular order. The order doesn't really matter. And then at the end, you combine them once they've been made individually. I'll go through what each of the kind of the point of each of these 5 is, and then I'll kind of explain why you don't want to combine them to further emphasize this point and how you might feel inclined to do so. Okay, so the 5 parts or components of a BIA are the impact assessment, which looks at when you lose a certain thing, what is the impact or what is the consequence or negative effect, whatever, of losing that thing. You have some form of timeline breakpoints, and there's a bunch of jargon acronyms that are used for this, like RTO, MTO, RPO. There's a bunch of things, but I'm going to show you how to do these without needing to know the jargon. I'm going to use a lot of the jargon just because it's faster, but you'll be able, if you can conceptually think of these when I show you how these work, the jargon won't matter. So you have the timeline breakpoints. You've got criticality, which looks at how critical something is. So you're going to have all the components of this organization or whatever, and you have to kind of rank or tier out how important something is relative to something else. This becomes very important later. You're going to have dependencies. This is the 4th thing, dependencies, where you essentially map out. You usually, well, you don't have to use a dependency map, but I'd recommend it. It's usually a better idea. You're going to map out this organization, and you're going to see how everything interconnects to everything else, what thing needs what other thing in order to operate. And then finally, you're going to look at resources, especially critical resources. So what stuff does the stuff need to run? When this is all together, you're able to look at these things and how they mesh, and you can kind of reverse engineer every way the organization gets destroyed. So you could go to critical resources, you could just take out a resource that it would require, start a countdown basically that you found out in the timeline breakpoints, to watch until it failed via something in dependencies, look how those failures cascade out through the dependencies, and then see how long it takes when combining a bunch of different timelines until you have a criticality 1 to like a most critical function or process or whatever that gets knocked out, which is going to incur a certain impact past a certain threshold at which you know you are done. You're having an exceptionally bad day. It's bankrupt time. This means that you can precision target one thing and know within a small margin exactly how long it takes for everything to collapse and how that happens. So you can see the exact pathway the thing takes to collapsing. You have a fundamental understanding of the vulnerabilities of the business or the organization or whatever. BIAs are, and you may have, if you watched the risk matrix and the risk management part of this video before this, BIAs are all hazards-based planning tools. An all hazard plan is something that doesn't care what the hazard is. It's ready for all hazards, as it were. It could be a tornado, it could be a volcano, it could be whatever. You don't really care what the thing is that's hitting you. You understand how you get hit. That's the idea. When you're making this BIA, it can be a monster in terms of resources. It can be an absolute resource hog. You should be very careful about how broadly you're scoping this. In program initiation, you probably, I hope, scoped out the size of this program. You should know where your limits are. Reconvene and figure out what that is before you start the BIA. If you start going out of scope now, things get unwieldy, to say the least. Things cannot be too complicated. with the BIA. If they get too complicated, it takes too long for you to finish this sort of analysis, and you're stuck in coming up with vulnerabilities, and then you have no time for solutions. Things also can't be too simple. If they're too simple, you don't have anything to work with. So you got to find this balance. Once again, the scope and program initiation, that part should be informative here, should help with this. I introduced some jargon concepts in the concepts and pitfalls and etc. video. One I'm going to come back to here because it's very important for how you're refining your BIA is function process application. Figure out what level you're working at and figure out what you're describing. Every single part of the BIA is going to reference whatever you choose here. The impact assessment is going to involve you listing, for example, let's say you do it at the function level. It will involve you listing all of the functions and then finding out their impacts. The criticality is going to involve listing all of the functions and then figuring out all their criticalities. The resources required are going to involve listing all the functions and then listing all of the resources that they require. This whole process is completely dependent on what you choose to target. So you got to figure out what you're doing right at the beginning, and you are going to be completely restricted by that. If you're doing only function level, then you don't need to care about things that are process or application specific. You're limited there. If you're doing function and process together, you are creating an extra dimension on this. I will explain that a bit more later, but suffice it to say, it gets real complicated real fast. If you're doing process only within one particular function, that's fine. You can do that. It's still only one level. If this is your first time doing this, for the sake of everyone's sanity, please just do one level and then build upon it later, but don't do two at the same time. It gets extremely complicated, and there are very few people I have ever met that can handle this level of complexity once you start multi-layering. Single layer, very handleable. You can do single layer, that's not a problem. The multi-layer gets complicated. I'm going to kind of try to explain why this matters. So if you list all the functions, let's say you do just a process level or just a function level, fine, I will do process. So let's say you do just process level. So you take our previous example of sales, and sales has 5 or 6 components to it. So you've got your 5 or 6 sales. What you basically have is a flat plane. So on your flat plane, you've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, and they all interconnect to each other. So you've got your sales plane. If you do sales and operations, well, now you have the sales plane with its things and the operations plane with its things. Well, and you have other parts of your business. Maybe you have administration. That's another plane. Your 2D diagram is now 3-dimensional. So you now have a 3-dimensional map. This starts getting very difficult to put on a piece of paper or chart paper or to navigate. You start needing to look into mental models. If you do function, process, and application, so you do all 3 levels, now you have an application plane inside, like let's say you have a specific application within the sales process. You have all these different applications, sales function, and all these sales processes in the sales function. So you have a 2D plane of applications within the 3D model of processes of sales within the 4th dimensional model of functions. I'm not kidding. This is actually 4D mapping. The level of complexity and the degree that you have to warp your brain to be able to think in 4D, this is not a meme. This is actually a 4D model. No. I'll see if I can show you guys an image of what conceptually viewing a 4D model looks like, which is like a 3D model that you rotate in flux. We're we're trying to map a business here and find solutions, and now we're incorporating complex mathematics and geometry. Okay, it's too much work. Stick with a piece of paper. Just do the piece of paper. Don't vomit from the migraine you get. Okay, it's just fair enough. So pick one thing. If you want to do, I'm going to talk a bit about now, I guess, which things should you pick and why? What do I choose if I'm going to do one? Do I choose function, process, or application? If you're the business owner and you're trying to think about where's my business direction is going, you're in a strategic position, you're trying to look at the thing overall, bird's eye view, do function. You're trying to figure out the general direction, where you prioritize things, just do function. Okay, that makes sense. You're a strategic thinker anyways. Are you the director of a specific department? Are you someone who's a manager of a specific department? Do you oversee one individual, one function? So do you work in a plant making things on an assembly line, and are you responsible for making sure the lines operate? You don't really care how many sales you make. You don't really care about whether or not the IT is functional. You care that it is because you're using it, but you're not running it. You make sure that the assembly lines move and the stuff gets built. Great. Do a process level thing on processes, the processes within operations. Focus on your different lines. Perfectly reasonable. That's your wheelhouse. That's what you do anyways. It makes sense. Are you someone who does a specific process? Do you make sure that a specific thing is done properly? So you do one specific job, making sure one hyper-specialized thing is done that's maybe within operations or within sales, but you do a specific thing. Are you a salesperson and are you the closer? Is that what you do? You're the closer, you're not the cold call, that you're in the process of closing. Great. Do application, because you're talking about a specific process. So if you were to do function, for example, you have the business and its functions, and you have the functions listed. You think about it function level. If you're doing process, you have the single function and its processes. The processes get listed. If you're application level, you have the individual process and its applications, and you're looking at the applications and how they get implemented. So I'm going on about this quite a bit. The reason for it, once again, is because you have to establish this right at the beginning, because it's going to be the way every single thing is viewed and categorized and etc. You need to determine which one you're doing and what you call these things even. Most organizations, because most organizations are like businesses, for example, or small businesses, haven't actually mapped out what their functions are. Larger businesses will end up doing this because a lot of this is standard big business jargon. But a lot of people, organizations haven't, many of them don't even have business plans, but many of them haven't gone through the process of even thinking about what the components of their operation are and mapping this out at all. So this conversation might not be a simple, hey, let's just write stuff down. This might be an actual, how do we view our business or view our organization conversation. This might be a thing where we have to put names to things we didn't have names before. So this could take some time. Spend the time you need, make sure that you do that. You need the BIA to be practical. If you have data for the sake of it being data, it's kind of a waste of time. This document, this giant thing you're making here, is practical or usable for a purpose by nature. If it's not designed in such a way where the organization can use it to come up with solutions, it's pointless. If you have a particular way that your organization likes to think, you can usually modify the BIA in such a way that it's in that sort of language or it's in that sort of visual framework or whatever, so that it's easier for people to kind of understand it. It's not like they're learning a foreign language. Consider that sometimes people have difficulty with certain things like new large documents and things like that, not because of the content, but because of the format. So that's one thing. The other thing on the practicality, the point of this is to help you better target and generate solutions within a very specific scope. If the BIA is not serving that function or serving that purpose, something very wrong has happened. So it should be a usable, practical document. When you get through the end of this, what you should have is, depending on the amount of detail, a one-page or one chart that is the impact assessment, a one-page or one chart that is criticalities. You might have a second chart in criticality just to define what the things actually mean for reference, but the data point's really one chart. One page or one chart that represents all your timeline breakpoints, maybe with a visual added on for reference, but you're looking at basically one chart. A map or something else, which is, once again, one image that is going over your dependencies, and then one chart really for your resources required. This is 4 charts and a map. This is like 5 pages you can spread out beside each other and go, got it, I see how my organization works. This should not be a 50-page nightmare. This sort of stuff generally doesn't need complex title pages and summaries and annexes and da-da-da-da-da. The bulk of what you're using here is going to be 5 potentially fairly large pieces of paper, or 5 images or 5 files with a really obvious picture on the front to tell you where you lost the binder. Okay, that's you should not be bloating this with a bunch of useless garbage. Just, this is the information you need. Don't overcomplicate this, please. Another thing. This is going to be a map on how to destroy your organization. A relatively skilled individual in this area, if they get access to your BIA, is going to know how to precision destroy what you've built. Now, not knowing your vulnerabilities, I would argue, is more dangerous than having this how to destroy me list hanging around. But you will have made a document that is incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands to your organization. Be careful about who gets access to this, where you store it, and who you bring into the inner circle of doing your BIA. You are going to be reverse engineering how to end your business or end your organization. That is what you're doing. You're going to find out exactly how you fail. You do not want the wrong person knowing how to make you fail. Okay, I just wanted to mention that and have that be known right at the outset, because you are creating an incredibly valuable yet potentially quite dangerous document here. Once again, it's better that you know it than you don't know it, because getting blindsided tends to be worse, but it's a thing. On that note, we're going to go through some of the different parts of the BIA. We'll go through all of them actually, and I'll start with next, ideally in the timeline, I suppose, but you could skip around because once again, you can do these in any order. It's up to you. We're going to be doing impact assessment. Before you start this, start figuring out what you want your function or process or whatever application to be, and figure out what those names are. You need that for all 5 steps.